I know. Oh
Oscar,
God.
when was Highland open up?
94.
Soon thereafter.
94.
Well, they're still wandering around outside, you know.
To what?
They're still wandering
I
around.
know they are. I know.
What are you drinking?
Only black
Not
lager.
used to this mic though, you know?
Huh? I am
I haven't had a chance. I'm only had.
I get used to holding the
I haven't
mug.
gotten around to yet. But we have time. After.
So we're starting at 7:10. Who is? It's whoever gave all the money for this nice place we're sitting. I do not know. I'm sorry, but that's right. Yeah. All right. Hello. Yeah. Good evening. Can you hear me? You can hear me. All right. All right. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. All right. Welcome to the National Museum of American History. This is an after-hours, American History after-hours event, and this is also the final event of our annual Food History Weekend, which has been organized around the theme Many Flavors, One Nation. I am Teresa McCullough. I'm the historian of the American Brewing History Initiative here at the museum. This is a project to collect objects and documents and stories related to the history of beer and brewing in America and give those things a permanent home here at the Smithsonian. I want to say a huge thank you to these four panelists, not just for traveling to DC to be with us tonight, but for very generously donating the beer that we're all enjoying. Yes. This evening's event and the larger Brewing History Initiative are possible only thanks to the very generous support of the Brewers Association, and that is the not-for-profit trade association that promotes and protects craft brewers, their beer, and their communities. And there are some representatives of the Brewers Association here tonight. I see Paul and perhaps others, but if we could give them a round of applause too. Thank you. Yeah. I also want to thank all of you for being here, and that is because I'm delighted to share that the museum has never sold more tickets to an American History After Hours event than tonight. That tells me that you Washingtonians like your history with a little beer. Maybe it's the reverse, I don't know. But it also tells me we need to host more events like this, so thank you for your support. I just want to start with a few quick housekeeping notes. I am going to very briefly introduce our speakers, and then we'll have a conversation of roughly 45 minutes or so. The final 15 minutes will be dedicated to your questions, so as we talk, please think of things that you might like to ask our panelists. This is a casual conversation, so please give them your attention. They've traveled to be with us, but if at some point you're starting to feel a little thirsty, perhaps a little hungry, then feel free to go and to refill your glass and to get more food. As you've been told, you get one glass this evening. Please remember to hold on to it, but now it's yours forever and ever. Please take it home with you at the end of the evening. After our discussion, you'll have plenty of time to eat, to drink, to chat with the brewers. Also, the two exhibits on either side of this plaza are open this evening, which is really a great privilege. They both open this summer, the history of American democracy, the history of American immigration, and they're just fantastic new exhibits, so I do invite you please to check those out after the conversation. As you'll notice in your program, there's a scavenger hunt with prizes that we'll send you through the exhibits and elsewhere if that interests you. And I also want to draw your attention to this set of tables on my right. There are curators and librarians from throughout the museum who have pulled amazing objects out of all of our storage rooms, all related to beer. And so you'll see steins and coins and trade literature, and even some of our very recent acquisitions that are part of the Brewing History Initiative. It's very exciting to have them here this evening, so please definitely check that out afterward. And last but not least, the doors to the terrace behind you are open. There is cornhole outside, and so you are welcome to enjoy that afterward, and the view of the Washington Monument and the National Museum of African American History and Culture. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. An Bowie is founder of the Answer Brew Pub and Craft Brewery in Richmond, Virginia. An and his family fled Vietnam in the 1980s and journeyed to Richmond, where they opened Mekong Restaurant. An won national recognition for his menus of dozens of Belgian and American craft beers before opening the restaurant's attached brew pub in 2014. An ushered in the craft beer scene in Richmond. Beer is the answer, An says. Uli Benowitz is founder of Weeping Radish Farm Brewery, originally located in Manteo, North Carolina, and now in Grandy. Uli emigrated from Bavaria to the US and in 1986 opened Weeping Radish, the state's first craft brewery. In order to do so, he worked with state legislators to change the laws to allow brewers to sell their beer to customers on site. Weeping Radish has dedicated much of its production to its traditional German brewing methods. Oscar Wong is founder of Highland Brewing Company in Asheville, North Carolina. Oscar was born in Jamaica, came to the US to study engineering at Notre Dame, retired to Asheville, and there he named his brewery after the Scots-Irish who immigrated to the area in the 1700s and 1800s. Highland is the largest family-owned craft brewery in the Southeast, and Oscar's daughter, Leah Wong Ashburn, is its president. Celeste Beatty is founder of Harlem Brewing Company. Originally a home brewer, Celeste draws inspiration from the rich traditions of world-class brewmasters from Africa to America, as well as the history of New York City's Harlem neighborhood. Celeste and her brewery are an active presence in her community. She sources hops grown in local gardens in Harlem, in Queens, and in upstate New York. So as we know, the theme of our conversation here this evening is Brewing in Motion, Histories of Beer and Migration in America. If you look at a beer menu today at a really good restaurant or a pub, you'll find a variety of things. You'll see beer styles that refer to geographic locations. You might order a Pilsner or a Belgian Ale or a West Coast IPA. Breweries will proudly tell you where they get their hops or where their barley is malted. You might enjoy beers that were aged in wine barrels in Northern California, or aged in a foeder in Wisconsin, or conditioned in a cask. The beer menu you're looking at is a good one because it reflects the many ways in which brewing techniques, beer styles, and ingredients and people have moved from place to place over time. America has always been a place where people have been on the move. In the 19th century, immigrant German entrepreneurs built beer into a major industry in the United States. That is a familiar story. But the American brewing history we know began long before then and has grown ever more diverse since then. In the mid-20th century, the first generation of American craft brewers looked to Europe for inspiration as they began to make porters, stouts, and other styles that were quite exotic to American beer drinkers at the time. But now Americans enjoy the richest, most varied brewing culture on the planet. And brewers from around the world take their cues from what's brewing here in the United States. Our four panelists this evening each bring unique stories of movement and migration to their beer, whether through personal experience or inspiration. Listening to them and enjoying their beer will help us appreciate the extent to which brewing in America continues to be a history of movement and migration in the making. And so I'll begin by asking a very simple question. I just would like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves a bit further. Tell us a bit more about yourself and where you have moved, where has life brought you? And we'll start with Uli.
Good evening. Thank you so much. It's been a fantastic life. I started, or my mother started me, in Lima, Peru, South America. I was born there and lived there for 8 years before I moved to Bavaria, or I was moved to Bavaria with my parents. And there I learned everything about Bavaria, from knee slapping to beer drinking. And I was actually, over there we literally were raised on beer. The Bavarians have a different attitude towards alcohol. They regard that as food that shouldn't be prohibited. And as children, we were literally not allowed to drink soft beer. because of the sugar, but we're allowed to drink beer anytime, so that's a culture. So anyway, I lived in Bavaria, went to school there, and right on the Austrian border, probably the most beautiful part of Germany. And from there, I fled one more time, this time to England, because my parents wanted me to go to University of Munich, and I hated learning, so I just fled to England and worked on a farm in Cornwall, and then went to agricultural college in England, milking cows. We had 2,000 sheep, and they all had babies within 9 weeks, so that was interesting. And after England, I got my degree in agriculture. All I wanted to do was have fun with farming, and England wasn't much fun to farm if you don't own a farm. A friend of my brother's actually at the time was selling American farms to Europeans, and I thought, wow, that's a good start in life. So I jumped on a plane, came to America on a visitor's visa, and my first project was literally clearing 9,000 acres of swampland in North Carolina. And we built roads, canals, pumping stations, and turned that into a beautiful farm. That was my first job. Currently I manage 24,000 acres of farmland in 4 states. That's my day job. My brewery still remains a hobby, although out of control, obviously, as you can imagine. So I started in 1985 with the brewery. I didn't start it one more time. My brother from Munich called and said, look, I've got a great idea. I'll sell you a little brewery, little brother, and she'll spit out beer and money. And of course I believed him and I bought it. And obviously that's the last time I've ever talked to my brother. Then somebody suggested I better check with ABC. I didn't know what ABC was. I thought some sort of learning activity. Turns out to be alcohol beverage control. I had no idea there is such a thing. And they informed me that it was illegal to have such a thing in North Carolina. That's always a great start to a project. With the help of a local senator, we went through this process. In the process, somebody suggested I need to talk to a lobbyist. I didn't know what that was either. But that was an interesting experience as well. But anyway, we passed this law in less than 6 months. It went literally through the House and the Senate, and it was passed at the time I was on a visitor's visa in this country. What a country. I think it was expired too at the time. You name a country where a guy from another country on a visitor's visa can pass his own law. That is amazing. I only made one mistake. I should have worded the law in such a way that you may have one and only one brew pub in the state of North Carolina. Somehow I missed that bit. So anyhow, that's how we got going with this, and it's been an incredible ride. By now, we are over 200 breweries in North Carolina, and it's been what can I say? It's just been fascinating. Last year, the Brewers Association, or the Brewers Guild in North Carolina, celebrated 30 years of microbrewing in North Carolina. It has just been an incredible ride. And even on the farming side, I'm still involved in farming, but by now we also have wind farms and solar farms and everything else. So what a nation. Where can you do all these things and really have fun with it? So it's been a great ride, and that's how I got started in America. I'm a citizen now.
Oscar.
That's hard to top. Actually, I talk about Uli many times about breaking the rules and making it happen. So I'm actually very honored to be here to represent all the hundreds of brewers who have come in here from afar and made a difference in this land of opportunity. My parents are from China, and I was born, raised, grew up in Jamaica, West Indies. I had, just easy time where on a Sunday we'd probably get a ride up to jump in a taxi and go up to Hope Gardens, one of our favorite places. I think that's me on the right. And then after that, my father would actually cook on a Sunday, which I still try to follow. And he would actually have fried prawns and roast duck and roast pork, and those are considered hot in the Chinese tradition. Well, you have to balance that with something cool. So at the tender age of 12, I had my first beer. You had to have a couple ounces of beer. The great thing about it is my siblings didn't care for it as much. And it turns out my dad quit doing it after a while when he figured I was getting all my siblings beer. So fast forward to, I went to high school. All boys, so I wanted to meet girls. So that's one of the things I did. Oh, they're still showing that, okay. After graduation, I got a chance to go up to Notre Dame, which is a big deal. Got my master's on my own, because one of my prouder moments was to be able to write my family and say, I got an assistantship and you're off the rolls, I'm on my own. Then the next thing I did was to start brewing in grad school. Now, that brewing wasn't very good beer, but it was I think that's one of the questions you have for me later on will come up. But after that, I got a business started in engineering, and I kind of forgot about brewing for a while. But then, by the way, that was Father Cancro that's blessing that first brewery we had in the basement. And then my responsibility when I was introduced to an award-winning brewer after selling my engineering business was to have the engineering, the regulatory, the financial, marketing. So I think the next thing I see would be my attempt at marketing, which was just a banner. I guess it kind of worked for a while. Many years after that, we ended up what did I do next? You got to have the pictures. I can't tell what
There you are,
next.
right there. Look right there.
Oh, I can see. Oh, there. Okay. So I want to say that coming up here, I met lifelong friends, and I always felt that beer is the drink of conviviality, camaraderie. I met a lot of lifelong friends at Notre Dame, and throughout my years, so many people. I'm so thankful for the help that I've gotten from so many. And now our daughter is in charge of the brewery, and that photo is 3 years old, by the way. So she's been in charge for 3 years. And so I'm very thankful for all the great just appreciation from everybody. And we moved around. We lived in California and then New Jersey and now North Carolina. But the main thing is that it's meant a lot to each community that we've been in. We've been so accepting, and we moved around a lot. So, and then, as Uli says, it's a great land of opportunity, and I'm so fortunate to be a part of it. All right, Celeste.
Good evening. Thank you for having me here today. Wow. So many memories about how I got into the beer business. But I started homebrewing about 17 years ago. I love cooking. I love gardening. I'm from North Carolina. I was a Future Farmer of America student. Spent time on my grandparents' tobacco farm, mainly picking the beautiful green worms that like to eat the tobacco leaves. That's my job, was to find them all in the tobacco patch. But I've always loved the land, and I've always loved food, and I love to hang out in the kitchen with my grandmother and my mom, seeing and smelling what comes from the pot. Incidentally, the same pot that I started brewing in was one of my mom's stock pots, because you can literally use the pot to brew beer. That's how we all start as home brewers. I go, that's pretty cool. I like the flavors of beer, and I love the aromas and all of that. How did I end up in Harlem? Well, North Carolina to Harlem. I wanted to contribute to rebuilding Harlem, being a part of the new Renaissance, as people call it. My parents were always saving something. We were always piled up in the back of the blue Buick station wagon, you know, when the one that had the seat in the back where you said goodbye to the family. We made many of those trips from North Carolina to Harlem to visit our cousins. And everybody would tell us, oh, don't go. And they would literally have a group prayer whenever we left because they were concerned that we may not make it back or something would happen to us. But that adventure of leaving North Carolina and going to visit our family in Harlem and then eventually making the decision to move there to see what I could do to make a difference. And somewhere along the lines I started brewing because I like cooking with beer and wine and took some of my mom's pots and pans up with me. And when I started making beer, because I was brewing with all those other beers that we know, Sam Adams, even Bud Light and others, putting into my soups and stews and really enjoying that flavor. A friend of mine gave me a home brewing kit as a gift and said, make your own beer. I was like, is that legal? Living in a small apartment in Harlem on the 3rd floor, I wasn't sure what my landlord would think, but I found out that a law was passed by Jimmy Carter in the 70s, I believe, and that he made it possible for us to brew small batches. Well, my landlord wasn't convinced. He was like, yeah, brew in here, you're going to be thrown out. Anyway, I started brewing small batches in my apartment, and he didn't quite figure out what the aroma was coming from my apartment. But I just kind of fell in love with the aromas, putting that water and barley and having that sort of breakfast cereal smell that you get when you brew. If any of you are, any brewers in here? Home brewers? Oh, look at this. We're surrounded by these guys.
All over.
So that smell, that aroma, that nostalgic feeling of really, really being in the kitchen and enjoying that. And I fell in love with that. I fell in love with it because I love growing, and I grow hops because they're perennials. You know what that means, right? You do all that work and they come back, so you don't feel disappointed. So I just fell in love with doing stuff that I grew up with on a farm, spending time, and all those little nuances of the smell and growing and seeing something that you put your hands into, your time into, and seeing the benefits of these amazing things that grow from April through August, 15, 20 feet. Oh my gosh, every year they come back. We just harvested our hops a few weeks ago. So all of that is what really got me excited, but what really got me hooked into the beer business is learning about the history of brewing, finding out about its roots in Africa and other parts of the world, Africa, Asia, Europe. There are all these cultures that have such an amazing history of beer, and it's starting. Now my brewery, my brew house, as I call it, my brewdio, as I call it, is on 141st Street. It's a small, space where I invite people to come in and brew with me. It happens to sit on what was Alexander Hamilton's 30-acre farm. Now I think he brewed, and I happen to think probably somewhere around the area where I brew my small batches. But I pull a lot from history, and I'm very inspired by the history in Harlem and different histories and cultures. And a lot of that gets infused in an interesting way, I think, in the beers that I make. So I love that, just really touching history and learning about culture and letting that influence what you put in that pot, what you end up brewing. So giving back and celebrating those cultures and histories is something that I've grown to love. And certainly the family of brewers. Looking forward to collaborating with you guys on some brews. That's really what craft brewing is all about, that community of craft and celebrating community and what we love. So it's been an amazing journey for me. I'm still learning so much. I don't know everything about it, but I'm certainly happy to be here today and look forward to sharing our beers with you and having more conversations. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, Ron.
I guess I'm last. Anyway, my name is On Bui. You guys ever been to Richmond? I'm from Richmond, Virginia. Met a few folks here tonight. I am originally from Vietnam. I was born in 1974, a year before the end of Vietnam War. So we were part of the South, and we lost the war to the North, which is communist. So throughout my childhood, my dad was in prison. He was captured. So I spent most of my time with my mom, help her out the rice field. So, and then by the age of 5 and 6, I know how to plow the rice field by myself. I try to help my mom earn a living working on a rice field. And by 1984, my dad got out from prison, and he looked at all the kids, and I was about 10, 11 then, and I have no formal education. I mean, just always working, help my mom, and had no education at all. So my dad had an idea that you guys need a better environment, and so so that's why he suggested us maybe escape Vietnam and maybe go to the U.S. or go to Europe and see if you guys can have a better education. Because my dad was very educated. So in the mid-'90s, there was a lot of boat people that left Vietnam, and we were part of those people. So my two older brothers and I decided to escape Vietnam in 1985. And it took us 3 tries. On a third try, we make it clear out to sea, and it took us about 7 days, 7 nights to get to Malaysia. And by the 5th day, we ran out of water and food, and we have a small boat, and it's about 58 of us on the boat. Consists mostly family, and kids start to cry, and women and families start to pray. So, and everybody thought that was the worst, but nope. The next day, there was a pirate ship from Thailand. They docked next to us and started pointing a machine gun at us, and got guys jumping over with knife and gun and demand jewelries and women and girls. And lucky for us, I don't know how we were so lucky to survive, but at the last second, the captain waved them off. So they took all the jewelry they can. They get back to their boat. And I don't know how, but kids start crying and women's crying. So they didn't kidnap any girls or wives. So lucky for us. And then when their boat turned away, they dropped some water, some food into the ocean. And we swim out, and then we grab some. And the first thing we do, we fed to the kids and to the mom. And I mean, I was about 10, 11. To me, it didn't scare me at all. To me, it's kind of like an adventure. So 2 days later, we landed in Malaysia. And we stayed there for about 6 months. And we turned our paperwork in. And luckily for us, my dad was part of the South Vietnamese Army. He was an Army advisory to the U.S., so we turned our application in, and we got accepted to the U.S., and we had a family of sponsor by St. Bridges in Richmond, if anybody from Richmond, that sponsored us. So we flew to the Philippines for 6 months in a camp and next to the U.S. base, and that's where I first started my education. That's when I was 10, 11, started learning ABC, and the first 2 words I know really well, and really useful to me when I get to the U.S. with the word yes and no. So when somebody hand me a plate of food, if I look at it, it's good, I say yes. If there's something that it doesn't look good, I say, no. So that was the first 2 that I learned. So we were in Philippines for 6 months, and then after that, we flew to Virginia. It was in November, and back in 1986, when you get off the airplane, it wasn't like now you can walk it off into the terminal, but now you have to walk out the door, down the step. So I have never experienced the cold weather, and we step out, you have a short sleeve on, and it was cold, and I thought, whoa, it's like walking through a freezer. Yeah. So luckily, we just walking fast to the airport where we met our sponsor, and that's when they have jackets and waiting for us to put on for us, and it feel warm. So they drove us to a house where they rented for us, and it was back and back closing in the house, and food was everywhere in the kitchen. And at that point, I look around and say, wow, I mean, we are really in heaven, but heaven's kind of cold. But I can get used to this. Yeah, so my first experience with food was when one of our sponsors that I'm very close with nowadays, It's which I call mom and dad, and they have 2 kids. Where they're my siblings. So being away from my parent, I met my new parent. So to this day, they're my parent. They're my role model. They're so special to me the way I grew up now. So, but anyway, they take me to their house one day, and my first experience with American food was Karen. That's her name. Is that she wasn't a good cook, but she have a pack of hot dog, and then she put in a pot and boil it up in hot water, and she put in a bun, and then ketchup, mustard one side, and then laid potato chip on a paper plate. And then she handed me, and I saw his food. I said, yes. But I took a bite, and then I've never had mustard. I mean, everybody, it was strange. So I took a bite, and I said, So just having a fake smile and looking at Karen and say, So she turned around, so I slowly walked into the bathroom, and I flushed it down the toilet. But when they took us to Donut, that's a different story. Donut was awesome. So anyway, I started school in 5th grade, and I get to middle school, and then finished high school. So when I was in 4th grade, we sponsored our parents over with the rest of our siblings, and then I attended 2 years in community college. Never have a degree. Just that's when the family decided to open up a restaurant because of the idea of my parents, my dad. He came over and seen kids are working a warehouse, warehouse job, somewhere, have a second shift. So they never see us together except for like a major holiday or something like that. So he decided to say, why don't you guys do something that, that I can see you guys, one spot when I come by. So that's when the idea of the restaurant come by, because I have one of my sister-in-law was cooking in the kitchen, and I was in 2 years community college. I tried to major in hotel management, but never get a degree. So, and then plus I was working at a place called Chi-Chi. It's a Tex-Mex place, but now it no longer exists. But yeah, so we have some saving, and then we borrowed some money from the church, and then we bought a Vietnamese restaurant that was existing for $70,000. And then we changed the name to Mekong, and that was August 11, 1995. And we try to focus on Vietnamese cuisine and wine. But for 2 years, we were struggling. We were about to close a couple times. Then I told my siblings that, well, we'll go. With all the stuff that we've been going through, this is nothing. Maybe we should stretch out a little longer. And I told them, why don't we start focusing on the beer since the wine doesn't go well. And I told them I know something about beer. So that's where we switched the wine over to beer and slowly building the foundation. And it's been open for 22 years now. So with the success of the beer program that we have. Paul is here. Craft beer gave us 3 years in a row, best beer bar in America, and so is USA Today. So, and then we decided to open a brew pub. So I said, let's do it. Let's have more work. So we decided to open a brew pub. And the first year we entered competition in Virginia, and we won best beer. So I guess So life been struggling beginning, but now it's been very successful. Because this is, to me, the land of the free, and I still use the word heaven, so I'm still in heaven. So, thank you.
Thank you for all of your stories. I think it's just amazing the number of places that have been mentioned that have been in your past, and now we're all sitting together on the same stage. And to the theme of the discussion, I want to ask, how does your identity or identities, however you want to define that, as an immigrant or a refugee or a newcomer to America or just an American who has moved from place to place, how does that impact the beer you brew? And that might be on the level of ingredients or particular styles, but if someone has a glass from you that filled with your beer, what is it in your personal history that has gone into that beer? Anybody is for anybody.
The first guy.
Well, obviously, I'm influenced by the Bavarian lager beers. As I said earlier, over there, beer is food. The big thing they focus on is drinkability. Their beers are very, very smooth and very drinkable. And of course, the irony of it all is the idea of coming to America brewing German or Bavarian beers. I mean, they laughed at that over there because America wasn't a beer culture then. Now, oh my God, we have the Bavarians coming to America, looking at American microbreweries, saying, look at the variety of what you have over here now, and they are trying to bring that back to Germany. If you would have told me 30 years ago that the Bavarians would show up in America, trying to find out why American microbreweries are so successful, it would blow my mind. But it really is, I mean, their beers, there's a different culture over there, obviously, because they have nothing but local breweries. So you don't compete with other breweries. Basically, a restaurant only has one beer. I mean, if you go to the Oktoberfest, there are 10,000 people in a tent, and you have one beer, period. That's it. That's all you have in a tent. So it's a different mindset. Here, when you have many more beers, every beer has to stand out and compete against another beer. If you only have one beer because the local brewery supplies the local restaurants in the local community, you don't have that competition. So it's a very different mindset. To them, literally, beer is like bread, like sausage. It is part of their daily life. But it doesn't have to change all the time. It doesn't have to stand out. It just has to be drinkable, just like bread is eatable. It's a very different mindset that we have when it comes to beer, which makes the Bavarians or the Germans a little bit different because they don't really win too many competitions with their beers. Why? Because if you have a competition, you really have, your beer has to somehow stand out. Their beers don't really stand out. They are just, wow, you can just drink them all day long. That's what it's all about with them. So it's a very different mindset, and that has influenced our beers. From the beginning, we have never gone wild with overhopped and whatever. We've always basically stayed true to where we were, and it's done us very well over time. I think, again, if you want to experiment beyond your base, that's great, but don't lose your base. And I think that's something that every brewery is beginning to understand as well. You have a reputation, you've got to stick to what, your base products, and then go out and try. And of course, it's craft. It is craft, and you've got to give your brewer a chance to develop something that is uniquely his as well. That is part of the job. If we just tell our brewers, you will brew this, and nothing, don't deviate from that, that's not what this culture is about. Our culture is about experimenting, expressions, variances, and doing different things. And I think that's why the microbrewing industry is so successful in this country, because it is truly a craft. And that is a little bit different to the culture I'm from. So we are kind of straddling that line a little bit back and forth. Some breweries do nothing but craft, and every week there's something wild. We're not on that line because of our tradition with basically Reinheitsgebot beer, 4 ingredients, and that's really what we were raised on. And so that's really our background, which is a little bit different to where a lot of this industry is. But this industry is, quite honest, now more successful than beer making in Bavaria. They are struggling more over there than we are. We're not struggling over here at all. They are actually struggling, so that's what they're coming to America for, to figure out what are we doing different. And it is the entrepreneurial spirit on the one hand, and it is the experimentation and expressions of brewers to just try different things as you go along. And don't try to corral a brewer. They want to have some freedom of expression as part of, just like an artist does. That's what a craft brewer does at the same time. It is an expression, which from a business point of view makes us a little bit tricky, because an artist can't be reined in either, and we've got to produce a consistent product on a commercial basis on the one hand, but you've got to have that artistic expression on the other. So that's really where those two cultures meet in a way.
Celeste, you seem very eager to jump on there. Have at it.
Well, I was in Sylvia's restaurant, which is like, the goddess of soul food in America, in Harlem on Lenox Avenue, on Thursday. I'm sitting there, as I typically do every now and then, having a breakfast, my usual fish and grits. Growing up in the South, that was like the thing to have, fish and grits and eggs or corned beef hash and grits or something like that. And a gentleman walked up to me, he's part of the staff, and he said, Celeste, I was looking at the show and I was seeing all this stuff about hops and beer, and what are you brewing these days? We started having a conversation, and I learned that his family, they were actually brewers. They brewed. I mean, we hear a lot about home brewing, but home brewing has been around for a very long time. I mean, there are people that have traditionally brewed beer forever in this country. They just weren't really known as home brewers as we think of it today, but they were. And he started telling me a story about his family, how they brewed a particular beer. They didn't cook it. It wasn't boiled. It was cornmeal, it was barley, it was, 2 or 3 other ingredients that they actually stored in a ceramic crock, put cheesecloth over it, and they let it ferment for 2 weeks. Of course, if the brewers in here, that all you need is some wild yeast or dry yeast or liquid yeast to add to that wonderful concoction, and you have something alcoholic. We call it beer. So it's just really amazing listening to his story and then comparing that to an experience I had in Africa, South Africa, with a group of women brewers who had a similar type of recipe, cornmeal, millet, sorghum, or some combination, not cooked, stored in this container, covered with cheese. I'm thinking, wow, this is interesting. They've been doing this for thousands of years. Here he is from African diasporic background, having been doing this, I don't know how long. So there's something to be said about, the passage of traditions, and the fact that given his background as an African diasporic home brewer, his father brewed, did the same thing for years. People do bring their traditions, whether you're German, whether you're Asian, they bring these, Latin, whatever, they bring these traditions with them. So in my search as a person of African diasporic background, being around, as my white bearded friends say, how did you get into this? They always tease me because they have these beards, a lot of them, and they're like, how did you get into this? So I've been on a search for, how did I get into this? Where does this come from? And I've been talking to people, just everyday people at a bar, like Sylvia's breakfast bar, and stumbling into countless people that looked like me that were brewing beet wine and, moonshine, and my mother's uncle did communion wine. I mean, just nobody wanted to talk about this. But, it's actually been very much embedded in our culture as Americans of all backgrounds. So I was particularly inspired to see the connection between these stories of heritage. And I think a lot of people didn't want people to know that they were brewing, in the backyard, out in the woods. They just didn't want to talk about it. But I've stumbled upon these stories and started documenting these stories of people that I run into that start talking about how they brewed beer with their father, how they brewed beer with their granddad in the 40s, the 30s, and all. I was like, wow, so that's given me a particular inspiration as a person of African diasporic background, to know that, wow, we brewed. We've been doing this for a while. And I've really enjoyed that. And then looking at the foods that we cook, my brewer in New York, they might do pumpkin beer. I grew up eating sweet potato pie, so I'm like, let's do some sweet potato beers. They are done. They're not done as much. And I'm trying to kind of draw from the foods and things that I love and the ingredients that I grew up with, and having that influence the beers that I make. Hence the Harlem Renaissance Wit. Brew the coriander, cumin, grains of paradise being an African spice. So I do, look at that history as other cultures do, and think about, what would they be brewing now? What would they have been brewing then? So that's been a really great source for me in looking at where I come from and the traditions of this country and how that influences my beer. So I'm having a lot of fun digging into that history and talking to the people to find out, how did they do this. So I'm looking forward to more conversations with more people to dig out some of those old recipes. That's what I get excited about. So
I think you make an important point there, that often when we're talking about cooking or brewing or winemaking, that often traditions they go unwritten, and so perhaps they're passed on from one person to another via, a mother teaching her daughter how to do something, or maybe it's the pot that's passed on from the father to the son. It's not often a text that is the historical authority in this case, and so you're doing important historical work in recovering those kinds of techniques and methods. I want to give Oscar and Anna a chance to answer this, but I also want to invite you to begin to think of your questions. And so if you have a question, please raise your hand, and Katie will find you. But want to hear if Oscar or An has thoughts about this.
Well, just quickly, because my parents are from China, so I'm Chinese descent with a Chinese background at home. Growing up in Jamaica, I did start with Red Stripe, and now, as far as the types of beer, it's you might say it's I have a Catholic background, and I have a Catholic taste in beer. It works across all lines, from Belgian, sweet Belgians, German, Pilsners, amber ales, IPAs. They all serve a niche somewhere on a given day, given food. And so I would say right now we're just having a great fun time just making what tastes good that week.
Okay. Great.
I'm done. That's it.
Thanks.
I guess at the end, as we can call ourselves as a fusion or a hybrid. So we have a little East meet West, stuff I like from Vietnam and Asia, is tropical fruit. So.
Could you, and please talk about this. The beer
Oh,
question.
okay.
Yeah.
So growing up in Vietnam, working out in the rice field with my mom all the time. So there's a lot of fruit that growing around. We have coconut, we have mangoes and passion fruit, Logan, lychee, so all those fruits. So when I grow up, I was like have spare time with climb on a tree and eat some of those fruits. So so those fruit had built in me when I was young. So, and then when I came to the U.S., I found my new love in coffees and chocolate and cakes and donuts. So that so that too kind of add up to what we do at the answer now. It's like I have an idea, or the idea come to me in the mid '90s. So I used to work at the Chi-Chi, and one of the managers was from Pennsylvania, and he was into beer. And at that point, I was not into beer. I was kind of into wine, because beer kind of threw me off, because it's kind of piney, kind of bitter, kind of skunky. So that kind of got me away from beer, but I got into wine. So one day he had a party, he invited me over, and he handed me a beer, and I looked at him and said, "You have any wine? Because I'm not into beer." And he asked me, "What do you like about beer?" And I told him, I just don't like the skunkiness, the bitterness, and the pininess. And I said, "Well, you haven't tried enough beer yet. I mean, there got to be a beer out there that you like." So he handed me beer, and he poured into a glass. I said, "Whoa, that's different." Because normally beer you just drink off from the bottle. So I said, try this. So I smelled. I said, wow, that smells good. It smelled like liquid food, because it smelled like banana bread and fig and raisin. I said, whoa, that smells good. Then when I take a sip, I mean, my eye was popped wide open, my jaw on the floor. I said, wow, it tastes like liquid food. It tastes like what it smells, banana bread and fig and raisin. I said, wow. I was like, is this what beer really tastes like? And the guy, and he said, well, if you like this kind of style of beer, taste more beer that brew from the Belgian, because they're very similar to this, and it's very food friendly, and it fits to your style. So that's when I'm on a hunt and try to find beer that style, and that's when I get into the Belgian beer. And that's kind of paved the way for our success at Mekong down the road, the beer program. So, and then I take that idea of, wait, if beer that tastes like food, the liquid food, then maybe we can take some of the tropical fruit that we have from Vietnam and put it into beer. Mm-hmm. Or the stuff that I like here, the chocolate, the donut, the coffee, that we can put that into a stout. So that's when we have that's when I have the idea of opening a brew pub and focus on those flavors. Or if you have a chance to taste tonight, we bought a lemonade that's made with passion fruit, mango, and calamansi. So
It's delicious. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes, please.
We have one over here. Is it on? Okay, we're on.
Hello. I was wondering, do any of you have any like stock in your company on the market, and would you allow somebody to buy into some shares in your companies or something like that?
Just looking for a little business advice
You
here,
have
you know?
prospective investors out here, yeah.
I've learned one thing in America: everything is for sale. So
Right. Yeah, sure. Great.
Oh, I'm boxed in. Oh no.
Taking along.
Hi. I'm curious if you have any current craft breweries that are still an inspiration to you. You've all talked about your personal backgrounds and developments. Are there any new up-and-coming breweries or breweries that you've traveled to that have inspired you to change your style or try new things?
I admire Oscar's brewery. I mean, he's just, what can I say? He's been my inspiration because of the success he's had with this. He's gone a very different direction. He's gone into a much larger, real professional. I'm just a hobby guy. And so that's really, I'm looking at some of our North Carolina breweries that, wow, I mean, they've reached volumes that, you know, you could just dream of. As far as beer styles is concerned, again, there isn't a week when somebody doesn't come up with something exciting now, even now. I mean, my own brewer came up with something this week, took a local coffee, roasted coffee, soaked it in vodka, and then used that concoction, added it to Kolsch, so it's called a Café Kolsch. It's the best beer I've ever had in years. I mean, that's what you call local collaboration. But see what I'm saying? All this is going on. It's a fluid kind of situation. That's the fun of this. I mean, you show me an industry where you can have that much fun by doing what we're doing.
I would say that I'm in New York, so I've always looked at Brooklyn Brewery as a great example of not just Garrett Oliver with all of his beers, but stuff that they do in the community. My background before I got into the beer industry, I worked with Ben and Jerry's, and they were really interested in giving back to the community, a lot of community-oriented stuff, and we try to model that where we can in the beer side. Although when I called up Ben Cohen, the founder, and said, "Can I do social venture with beer?" He's like, "Oh, I don't know, Celeste." But what we found by our own examples is that you can do a lot. You can make good beer and do good. So I like the model of what Brooklyn Brewery and so many breweries are doing. New Belgium Brewery, I've reached out to Kim Jordan to look at some of the stuff that they're doing as we look to venture into other areas. I mean, there's so many amazing stories of breweries that make great beer. I was just talking to a gentleman a moment ago who's opened a brewery in Virginia, who's
Well, that's me.
who's actually taking over a church. And my mother does Meals on Wheels every Wednesday. She's out there, 80 years old, delivering meals in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And I learned about this gentleman's story. He's taken over a church, converting it, and then the basement is going to be used for Meals on Wheels. I mean, so craft beer beyond craft and great beer, I just like the whole spirit that we're not just making good beer. There's tons of stories about that. But you have a lot of breweries that are really giving back. They're creating jobs. They're opening up their spaces to great causes. And that's really, I think, that really does influence the beer in a lot of ways, because when you think about people who are passionate about craft but also community, that's what I think really separates the craft breweries from the bigger guys. They really are genuinely interested. So the Brooklyn Brewery, New Belgium Brewery, the grain stuff, all of that. And there's so many local examples, countless, but I think those are two that I've kind of looked at and chimed in from time to time.
Well, I have many, but I can point to one guy because he's probably a little heavy on what we do nowadays. If you know guys, Sam from Dogfish Head.
Yep.
Yeah, because
Zach
we
Zach
carried lots
Rooney.
of beer in the beginning. We still do now at Mekong. But him always doing off the style, like he doesn't brew to style. He uses different ingredients. So that's giving me idea that you don't have to brew to style to be successful. You can brew a style but add
Beer
to
off.
where your ethic, your
Art.
love. So
It's an art.
Yeah, it's an art. Yeah, so
I believe he even describes his style as a culinary brewing style.
Yeah.
in particular. So
I
yes,
guess that's the word I
food
was
and beer.
found,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
I've always looked up to Uli for breaking the dam open, to allowing all the breweries to occur in North Carolina. As far as breweries that I hold in, I've always enjoyed Allagash, Victory. There are a lot of good breweries around. There are many excellent breweries. And what Celeste was talking about is something that we feel rather proud of. Back in the Asheville area, one of the big things we do is a lot of community work because, and this is part of what brewing has always been. Before we had internet and everything else, people gathered at the local pub, brewery, to find out, was Jane really sleep with Johnny?
Among other many important issues, clearly.
We have another question right here.
Okay, thanks. I understand that sake is actually, although it's called rice wine, it's actually rice beer, and it's a mash. And so then, you have this product that is a beer, but tastes quite different from what we think of as beer. And I was just wondering, is there any experimentation with using different grains and brewing beer from different grains than what is traditional?
Well, I think we use sorghum is used. Rice is very popular with Budweiser and Miller. And,
Bulgur wheat.
any kind of starch, I guess, can be used. But as far as sake, my understanding, you have to use a certain red rice or something, and fermentation. I guess it's similar situations that it all is starch that breaks down the sugars
Sugar.
that gets break down into alcohol and CO2. So whether you call it a beer or wine, I'm not sure. Wine, to my mind, always comes from a fruit, whereas a beer will come from a grain, generally.
Yeah, generally. Yeah.
And certainly gluten-free grains are very much a growing trend in the brewing industry these days. I think we have time for one more question.
One more question back here.
So in a museum of history, and we're talking about beer history, the four of you have contributed a very unique story to more recent American beer history. We've got these beautiful pieces over here. What are something that you'd like to save that is very unique to your beer story that you think would be special for someone 50, 100, 200 years from now to look back and go, that's what made these people unique. That's what made this an American beer experience.
That is an awesome question, and we will invite you to donate that object to the museum as you describe it. So,
I have one in my bag.
Please, I'm all ears right now. Please tell me. Yeah.
Well, what's something that my specific brewery has that contribute? Unique. Yeah. Lots of breweries. The unique factor is a challenge these days. I think a lot of what's happening with craft brewers that separate them in terms of their individuality is their story. Because, we all brew unique beers. There's no doubt about it. But there are many similarities because there are only so many grains, so many this, so many that. You'd have to start inventing grains and spices after a while. So at some point they align at a certain level. I think for my story and what I'm doing in Harlem, really aligning our beers with preservation. Harlem is going through a serious gentrification period, as are many communities, and it's rich with lots of amazing history. And in my own way, I don't think that Harlem Brewing Company, the name, will be able to ever live up to the legacy that's so deeply embedded in Harlem. What we try to do is celebrate that, to use our beer as a platform to talk about that history. So I would hope in some small way, very small way, that as we continue to sort of look at that history and using the banner of beer, whether it's our labels, tap handles, our collaborations with artists, as a way to continue to elevate and celebrate that history, because we live in a digital world. You know, the love letter that I dug up a few years ago from my great-great-grandparents that were ragtime musicians, where they used that beautiful script in 1890 whatever, we don't even write anymore. So how do we capture this history? What are some of the platforms we can use? I think beer is the perfect one. I mean, you have so many collaborations here with artists that are using that platform, that canvas, as a way to really look at how we can tell our stories and celebrate. So I would hope that, as I'm going to be talking to the museum about contributing a bottle from the People's Brewery, which was one of the first African-American breweries in Milwaukee in the 1950s, that physical item, that your job here is to keep the physical items, and maybe there might be a bottle or something from our little collection that might be worthy of keeping here within all of our stories in some way, capturing the physical ephemera or whatever you call it here. So that's what I hope that we'll be able to do one day.
Thank you. All right. Okay. Important objects.
Just, you want to go first?
Nope, go ahead.
Many moons ago, we met by accident at a beer tasting a White House historian, and he asked if we would brew a beer for a sitting president, and we were all excited, and we did. And the White House supplied us with bottles with the White House logo on it, and we had to fill them and return them to the White House, and count it. There was only one missing that I kept. And this beer was used as a Christmas present from the then current president to the previous president. I've got the funny feeling that in the current environment that wouldn't happen again.
I don't think he drinks.
But I still do have that bottle on my desk, and it is an incredible honor to have such a bottle with a White House presidential logo on the bottle.
Is that the White House Honey Ale that I brewed a few months ago? Is that the one?
That was 25 years ago.
Wow, wow, that's serious.
So that would be an object that is to us a true honor to have got one of those in our possession, and be glad to donate it to the history collection.
Nice.
So.
All right. All right. Oscar or On?
I have nothing.
That makes me very
That's
sad.
anywhere near that level
Okay.
of consideration.
Okay, Oscar, I think we got something that the museum wants. So
What is that?
we got one called the Ondo. So again, talk about Dogfish. We got this idea from them. They call them the Rando. It's a filter system that they put either hops or ingredient in, and they run the beer through.
Yep.
So we bought one from them, and we used it, and we put ingredient in, and we run the beer through, and I found that it only lasts 3 or 4 beer before the ingredient fade out. So I was thinking, what can we do that to get the beer flavor for the whole cake? So that's when the idea coming to my mind. Okay, maybe I need to get some kind of container that fit the whole cake of that. So that's when I went to a homebrew shop, and they have a 5-gallon corny cake with a lid on, and I bought that and some filter bag. So I put ingredient into the bag, and I close the lid, and I run the beer through. So you run the beer through, in, and then out to the draft line, and then you let it soak in. So when the beer gets soaked into the ingredient, it's kind of even out with the cake and the ingredient. So you got this from beginning to the bottom of the cake. It tastes about the same. So so that's when my love for coffees and chocolates and donuts and ice cream come to my head. That all those ingredients I would put, not all in one, but into the stout and run that to out to the draft. And it's been very successful for us. And I think it could belong here in the museum.
Continuing invention.
Yeah,
Long,
it's actually
long
called,
craft beer.
so it's the Rando, but it's very different from the Rando, so it's called Ondo.
Very good. All right. Well, we'll look for that in the future. Time has gone very quickly. Did you want to say something? No? Okay. Well, you know what? I want to finish this conversation actually with the words of your daughter, Leah. I found an interview with her, and she said, quote, "Beer is a connector of people. It is a social lubricant." And that is the point of this evening, is to talk about history, but also to meet each other, to enjoy delicious beer and food. So please do that now. Please greet our brewers and our entrepreneurs afterward. And thank you so much for coming and for your attention.